Hi, Vet. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing well, and you?
I'm doing well. So I'm calling again today so we can get an update on the SME meeting in the notes. I want you to thank you for joining us in the storytelling suite today and for our learnings who are learning to source pieces for our boutique. Let's start to define critical gatekeeping concept, the automatic rejection. When you're holding a luxury vintage piece, what are the three sensory signs of dry rot that tell you to put it back immediately?
Well, this is the most heartbreaking part of the job, but it is the most necessary. In the boutique, we look for three sensory indicators. First, the sound, the dust, and the tension. The sound, if you gently tug the fabric near a seam and hear a tiny crystalline crackle, stop immediately. That is the sound that the individual fibers snapping because they've lost all moisture. Second, watch your hands. So if a fine powder or a dust comes off onto your skin, the material isn't just dirty, it's disintegrating. So that means automatically it's going to fall apart. Finally, we use a pinch test. So if you pinch the fabric firmly and it doesn't spring back or leave the fibers intact, that means it's lost all its life. So for us, that's an automatic no. It doesn't even matter if it's a rare Galliano piece. If the structural integrity is gone, it's a liability for the customer and a risk to our reputation.
Okay. Thank you for that. That pinch test sounds like a skill that took you years to master. Can you recall maybe a specific heartbreaking piece that you've experienced in your time of collecting, maybe in the earlier days, or even times that people have come in with pieces that you thought that this is a great high-end designer that would have looked great on the hanger, but once it's off the hanger and once it's tried on, it's failing the test. Can you walk us through like what has that ever happened to you?
Yes, absolutely. So once I found a 1950 silk taffeta ball gown in a stunning emerald green color from 5 feet away. It was a true masterpiece, beautiful. But the moment that I lifted the hem to check the weight on it, it felt paper thin. I did a light pinch test on the interior lining, and my finger literally almost went straight through the material. The silk had been stored in a very hot attic for decades, and the heat had cooked the natural proteins in the silk,
Mm.
and silk will fall apart just like that from just that. So it's a really hard lesson, but you have to be disciplined. You cannot sell a garment to somebody that will fall apart the first time the customer sits down in it or rips.
That's a great test to have. So I want to go more into the stylist rescue and the soul of the garments. The discipline is what sets a curator from a collector. Now let's talk about the maybe pile, the pieces that you don't automatically reject. You often talk about when a garment has a soul that it can be saved. How do you decide is if it's worth a 5 minute fix or versus a total restoration piece?
So it always comes down to rarity versus effort. So if I'm holding a grail piece like an early Dior or a 90s Chanel, or like even an unsigned but perfectly cut 1940s rayon dress, I will forgive a shredded lining or maybe a missing button because the history of the silhouette are the primary selling points of the item. The soul of the piece is still intact. My go to, like 5 minute fixers, is what I call the style over. If there's a permanent tiny stain on a 70s, say, silk hem, we don't always try to chemical strip it. We rather perform a high waisted tuck in and a billow into a modern skirt. We also use statement vintage brooches to physically pin over any tiny like moth holes or pulled threads. It's about being stylish and about being a stylist, not just a seamstress.
Mhm.
You are identifying the flaw and turning into a focal point or hiding it through a clever proportion.
That sounds great. That's actually a great idea. I love the idea of the tuck and below. For a student who's nervous about styling over a flaw, what is some like what you would call a golden rule for choosing a accessory that hides a hole without looking like they're clearly trying to hide something? Like let's say you have a brooch that you want to place over like a little imperfection that can't easily be fixed. What how do you do it so it doesn't look like, oh, that's misplaced? How do you make it look like it goes?
Okay. So I guess you'd say the rule is intentionality. So if you use a tiny modern safety pin, it's going to look like a mistake. But if you use like an oversized gold tone 1980s lion head brooch or something like, something really big and oversized, it looks like a fashion choice. Like you meant to do this. So you have to match the weight of the accessory to the weight of the fabric. You can't put a heavy lead crystal pin on a delicate chiffon. It's going to create a new hole. So it doesn't make sense to make it worse. So you want to fix the look like it was the best part of the outfit all along. Like this was your purposeful thought.
Okay. All right. So that's actually a great idea to just place it, but make it still kind of fit in with the outfit as well. Okay. In our curriculum, the students are required to mix eras to create a modern look. So, how do you say you'll style an 80s power suit that has like huge, massive shoulders so it looks like more high fashion? We kind of spoke about this before, like what you would do and how you would bring it down. But just if you can go more into it, like how you would do that if you have a super stylish blazer that has massive shoulder pads, but without it, it could be a closet changing piece. What would you do so it looks more high fashion?
Okay, so I say that the secret to era mixing is proportion and grounding. To avoid the costumey look, the number one rule I would say would be never wear full head to toe vintage sets. So if you take an 80s blazer with huge shoulders, you must ground it, meaning you have to make it more modern with a very slim fit denim or a minimalist contemporary bodysuit. You want one loud vintage piece surrounded by quiet modern basic pieces. Also, when building a rack, I always tell my students to use a breathable anchor. If you have a rack of heavy winter wools, like or leather coats from the 80s, the customer's eyes get tired. You have to insert light element like a cream silk camisole or like a metallic piece of linen every three hangers or four hangers or so. This creates a visual breathing, like a breathing room, and it prevents the collection from feeling too heavy or too stagnant.
Okay, that sounds like pretty awesome. I see when I was in your store, I did see that you do that yourself, that everything is not super heavy, that you mix and you also use breathable anchors yourself. This is actually a great visual from what I've seen myself. If a student was working with a very limited inventory, let's say they have only 5 or 6 hero pieces, and how does that change the ratio from to keep the eye moving? Let's if they only have those many pieces in the store.
Okay. So on a small rack, it becomes about texture over color.
Okay.
So if you only have like five pieces, you alternate the feel of the fabric: smooth silk, fuzzy mohair, and then crispy cotton. By staggering the textures, you force the customer's brains to stay engaged with each individual piece. It's it's sort of like a psychological trick that makes a small collection feel more curated and more expensive.
All right, that actually sounds great. So when off off of our set questions, I wanted to ask, so when you're doing this breathable anchor type of vibe, when it comes to designer pieces, how would you get that done? Do you do Chanel, and maybe some a street designer, or do you try to put all of the designer pieces together, or how do you do it?
So it's called like the Z pattern of merchandising. So I always walk to the front of the store or the start of the rack and see if my eye naturally moves in a Z shape. I look for how textures bleed into each other, like leathers should move into suede, which then moves into silk. So it can feel like gradient, not a series of hard stops.
Okay. Do you have anything that you can consider your signature, like right before it's gone onto the floor in your store?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Like, what would you say is before it goes onto the floor? What would you say is your signature? Before it gets onto the floor.
My signature thought.
No, the signature, the last thing that you do to make sure that a piece is ready. And the very last thing, yes.
I don't have like a signature move. I would say once I feel like they're all put together, I just put them out and maybe I look at them and see if they look like I would wear them. That's always
Okay.
my signature. My signature would always say, I'd wear this.
Okay. Do you use any sprays or anything like that that may have tell the customer that this is curated, that this is like this is the vintage addict smell.
So I do use a scent
Thank you.
that I purchase online so that the store itself and the items always smell very fresh. Um, I shipped an item out to a customer and she messaged me and said, I love my items. And I also want to add how when I opened up the package, the scent that came out was amazing. And she's like, I don't get that, like when I order from anyone else. And I explained to her that at watching a movie, actually the story of Christian Dior, the lady that played in the movie said that that was their signature move in their early days, to spray their perfume on the items,
Mm.
just a small amount when you ship it, so that when the person opens the package, the first thing they get is a beautiful, pleasant scent, and automatically they fall in love with the item.
Oh, that's awesome. So overall, I just want to say that this has been a great interview and it's been an incredible masterclass in curation. I want to thank you for sharing all of your insights, and I look forward to working with you more on creating this SME project.
Well, it was my pleasure. You're very welcome. And I just want you to remember that we aren't just selling old clothes. We're really selling the next chapter of their story.
I think that's great. I think that's something that's great that I'm going to try to integrate that into the project as well, because the storytelling that comes along with vintage fashion, it's super interesting. Thank you again, and I hope that you have a great day, Yvette.
Thank you as well. You as well.
All
I
right.
look forward. Bye bye.
Okay. Mm, all right. So when you get a piece that you fix yourself, what is your specific kit that you may have in your store? Do you have like a little sewing kit or just like a little brushes or cleaners that you have just to get off some quick stains that you keep at on hand?
No, I don't. I don't have it. Everything I get, if it needs to be mended, I have a seamstress. I don't do that myself. The only thing I can really do myself is maybe fix a button. That's the only thing I would try to do myself. Anything else that needs to be fixed, even a hem, I need everything done professionally. I would never sell anything that looks like I did it myself and it's like not done professionally. I always take it to a professional seamstress.
Okay. What have you found to be the most common fix needed on the vintage fashion that you get? Would it be like more buttons, hemlines, or lining repairs?
It depends on the item. So if it's more so the jackets and the coats, it would be like the hems and the lining inside. They sometimes come unraveled. Most of the time, buttons I can do myself. It's not something that I would need to pay my seamstress to do. It's not, it's not hard. I know how to do it professionally, like where it looks like it's the item came this way. But I would say the hems and the insides of the items. would be the most thing that comes. Most of the time, vintage items are made really well, but throughout the years, even if they're stored, that affects the inside and the thread, not the lining itself, but the thread. It starts deteriorating, so it's going to come down. But oh, that's an easy fix.
Okay. So how do you decide when you're getting these people that come to your store? How do you decide what makes it into the collection of the vintage attic? Do you look for the theme, or is it just about the individual strength of the piece that's being shown to you?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't understand what you said.
So when somebody's coming to you with a piece of clothing that they would like to sell into your store, how do you decide what makes it into the vintage attic? Do you look for the theme of the piece, or to see that maybe if it's the individual strength of the piece that it just stands out, or this specific designer is hot right now? What makes you say, yeah, this is the, I'll take it to sell for you?
Well, for the starters, it has to be authentic. From the public, I only take high end designer items that have to be guaranteed authentic, as my buyers are aware that that's the only items they can get here. When they come here, they know in mind, I'm getting anything there, I'm getting it's authentic. It's never going to be an authentic or a knockoff. When I look at the item, of course, it has to be in. I don't say it has to be new, as most of these pieces are vintage. Even if no one ever used them, they still have to be in perfect condition, meaning, like I said, again, cannot be stained. When it's a mink coat, they cannot, the pelts have to be in good condition, where they have been at least stored and conditioned, so that the person who buys it is not going to say, well, it looks okay today, but they just spent $500 on a fur coat, and then in a year it rips apart. So those, the fact that it has to look like it's in good condition and it has to be well kept is my main priority. Other than that, it doesn't have to be like right now this is what's in style, because yeah, everyone has different style and people are looking for different items. As long as it's in good condition, is in it's authentic, guaranteed authentic, meaning the person who's bringing it in to sell has to have it authenticated, because I'm not a professional authenticator. So I can't say. I do know little bits and pieces of items like serial numbers on Chanel, and the G's on the Gucci labels. I know these things from my own experiences, and shopping as well, but I'm not an expert authenticator, so I can't let the person know, yeah, this is real 100%, because I can always be wrong, and then my customer could buy an item thinking they have an authenticated item, and my name is on that, which is the most important, that a person walking around saying, you told me this was authentic and I found out it's not.
Okay. You also do styling, correct, for your store, for your customers that do come to your store?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to ask a little bit about the styling aspect really quickly before we end this interview. I wanted to ask, so when you're styling a client in a high vintage fashion piece, what is your rule for mixing errors? Like, how do you prevent a 1960s Dior suit from looking like a costume rather than looking like a fashion statement right now?
Well, head to toe. It goes with head to toe. I would not, that's how I would prevent it from looking costumey, which is the word most of the time used.
Yeah.
If you go head to toe, 1920s, the only time I would allow that is if it's an actual theme party photo shoot. If a person wants to say, I'm coming in because I'm going to a Gatsby party and I know it's a theme party, then I would allow to style them head to toe looking like they're from the 20s or the 30s. However, if a person just wants that look, they like the vintage look, then you just focus on one item, not head to toe. One item that's vintage, that looks like it's an actual vintage item, not something that looks like it was made to look vintage. Most people like vintage pieces, like the real vintage pieces. They don't want a piece that looks like, so if they want a fringe dress, they want a fringe dress from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. They don't want a dress that was made 10 years ago that just looks fringe. It's a totally different look. So you just have to focus on one item that's vintage, and then add pieces from that are more up to date to make it doesn't make it look like it's too costumey.
Okay, so awesome. Last question about styling would be when you find a show-stopping piece, like maybe a tweed Chanel blazer that's brought to your store, how do you style that down for an item who wants to wear it more casually versus somebody who's trying to wear it to a formal event?
So the goal for any styling down, I would always say, which has been my go-to, would be distressed jeans. You can wear a sequin top with distressed jeans and it tones it down. You can wear anything you can wear that looks a little dressy if you add it with distressed jeans or even printed pants, like let's say camouflage. It always dresses it down and makes it look casual.
Okay, this is a final closer question for the interview. Um, Yvette, you spent the last 22 years preserving fashion history at the Vintage Attic. If there's one thing that you would want the next generation of curators and stylists to understand about having the soul of a vintage piece beyond the label of the price tag or the price tag, what would it be?
So I would say that after 22 years of entrepreneurship, I can truly say that there is an equal amount of highs and lows in self-employment. This is not a get rich quick. This is a job where you work for yourself, but there are an equal amount of highs and lows.
All right, thank you so much for your time. And I will be speaking to you again on the 11th, as we spoke about on the email. Thank you. And I hope you have
You're
a good
very
day.
welcome.
All right.
You as well. Bye.